In the scorching summer of 1884, when the Colorado Territory still held more secrets than settlements, three strangers arrived in the dying town of Deadwater, carrying lies that would either save them all or destroy everything they'd fought to protect. Kate Morgan thought claiming to be a mail-order bride would give her the perfect cover, but she hadn't counted on the sheriff being as fake as her story. Jacob Hayes thought impersonating a dead lawman would buy him time to disappear forever, but he hadn't counted on needing to protect a woman whose secrets were deadlier than his own. This is the story of how a fugitive mother, a guilt-ridden imposter, and a traumatized little girl discovered that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about being beyond redemption. Set against the harsh beauty of the Colorado frontier, it's a tale of justice, hard-won love, unexpected, and the families we choose when blood fails us. What begins as mutual deception becomes desperate alliance. What starts as survival becomes something worth dying for. And what seems like the end of hope becomes the beginning of everything none of them dared to dream. If you love stories where broken people find their way to wholeness through courage and love, please hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of the American West. She claims to be my mail-order bride, but I'm not who she thinks I am. The stagecoach kicked up a cloud of dust as it rolled into Deadwater, just as the church bells chimed noon, their bronze voices echoing off empty storefronts and abandoned dream. Kate Morgan clutched her 8-year-old daughter Molly closer as the driver called out their stop, her heart hammering against her ribs with the desperate rhythm of someone who'd been running too long. "This is it, sweetheart," she whispered into Molly's dark hair. "Our new home." Molly said nothing as she'd said nothing for the 3 months since that terrible night in Denver. The child who'd once chattered like a magpie now communicated only through solemn nods and the occasional squeeze of her mother's hand. Kate's heart broke anew every day, but today she couldn't afford to indulge in grief. Today she had to become someone else entirely. She helped Molly down from the coach, their few possessions clutched in a worn carpet bag that had seen better decades. The town of Deadwater stretched before them like a fever dream of the Old West. False-fronted buildings baking under a merciless sun, their paint peeling like old wounds. Half the businesses were boarded-up victims of the silver mine's failure 2 years prior. "You sure about this, ma'am?" the driver asked, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't much here for decent folks." Kate forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "I'm expected. Sheriff Hayes he's my intended." The driver's eyebrows shot up. "Sheriff Hayes, well, I'll be. Good luck to you both, then." He tipped his hat and climbed back onto the coach, leaving Kate and Molly standing alone in the middle of Deadwater's main street. Kate pulled the worn letter from her reticule, the paper soft from countless readings. The correspondence had been brief, practical, devoid of sentiment. Exactly what she'd needed when she'd answered his advertisement for a wife. Jacob Hayes, sheriff of Deadwater, Colorado Territory. Seeking a woman of good character to share the burdens and blessings of frontier life. Previous marriage experience preferred. Children welcome. She'd written back immediately, crafting a careful fiction about being a widow named Kate Morgan, whose husband had died in a mining accident. She'd even invented a touching story about how Molly needed a father figure. All of it lies, but necessary ones. The truth that she was Judge Catherine Reynolds' daughter, that she'd witnessed her father's murder by corrupt federal marshals, that she carried evidence of a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of territorial government, would have gotten them both killed. "Sheriff's office should be just down there," she murmured, pointing toward a modest building with iron bars on the windows. "Come on, Molly. Time to meet Sheriff Hayes." But as they approached the sheriff's office, Kate felt unease prickle along her spine. Something was wrong. The man who emerged from the building wasn't the person she'd expected from his letters. Jacob Hayes, or the man calling himself Jacob Hayes, was taller than she'd anticipated, with the broad shoulders that filled out his vest and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was weathered but handsome in a rough-hewn way, with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But it was those eyes that gave him away. They held a wariness that went deeper than professional caution, a watchfulness that spoke of someone always ready to run. Kate knew that look. She saw it in her own mirror every morning. "Sheriff Hayes," she called out, her voice steady despite the growing certainty that something was very wrong. The man's hand moved instinctively toward his gun before he caught himself. "Yes, ma'am, that's me." His voice was rougher than she'd expected, with an accent that didn't match the educated tone of his letters. "I'm Kate Morgan. This is my daughter Molly." She gestured to the child clinging to her skirts. "I believe you're expecting us." For a moment that stretched like eternity, the man who called himself Sheriff Hayes stared at her with something that might have been panic. Kate's heart sank. Had her carefully crafted correspondence been discovered? Was this some kind of trap? Then his expression shifted, and she saw him make some internal decision that changed everything. "Of course," he said, his voice warming as he stepped forward. "Mrs. Morgan, welcome to Deadwater." He knelt down to Molly's level. "And you must be Miss Molly. Your mama's told me a lot about you." Molly stepped closer to Kate but didn't retreat entirely. Kate noticed how carefully the sheriff moved, how he kept his hands visible and non-threatening. This was a man who understood frightened children. "I'm sorry I wasn't at the stage stop to meet you," he continued, rising. "Had some business to attend to. Let me help you with your things." As he reached for their bag, his sleeve pulled back, slightly revealing what looked like old shackle scars around his wrists. Kate's blood ran cold. Either Sheriff Jacob Hayes had a very interesting past, or this man wasn't Sheriff Jacob Hayes at all. "Thank you," she managed, her mind racing. If this man was an imposter, what had happened to the real sheriff? And more importantly, was she and Molly walking into a situation even more dangerous than the one they'd fled? But as they walked toward what she presumed was his office, Kate caught sight of a wanted poster tacked to the wall beside the door. The face sketched in rough charcoal was familiar. It was the face of the man walking beside her, though the name beneath read, "Jacob Morrison, wanted for murder and robbery, $500 reward." Kate's step faltered. She was placing her daughter's life in the hands of a wanted man. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Molly and run. But where could they run to? Her father's killers had resources across the territory. Her options had narrowed to this dying town and this dangerous man, or capture and almost certain death. She made her choice. "Sheriff Hayes," she said carefully, "I should probably mention that I'm not exactly what I seem either." The man who wasn't Jacob Hayes stopped dead in his tracks. Their eyes met across a space charged with mutual recognition. Two people who'd spotted each other's lies and had to decide whether to run or trust. "Ma'am," Kate glanced around the empty street, then leaned closer. "The men who killed my father are hunting me and Molly. We need protection more than we need honesty. If you can provide that, I won't ask inconvenient questions about your past." For a long moment, he studied her face with those intelligent gray eyes. Then slowly he nodded. "In that case, Mrs. Morgan, I think you'd better come inside. We have things to discuss." As they entered the sheriff's office, Kate noticed how her protector, for that's what he'd become, whatever his real name might be, automatically checked the street behind them and positioned himself where he could watch both the front door and the window. She and Molly had fled Denver with federal marshals on their trail, carrying evidence that could topple a conspiracy involving millions of dollars in fraudulent land claims. She thought finding a husband in a remote frontier town would provide the perfect cover. She'd never imagined she'd find a kindred spirit in deception instead. "Coffee?" the fake sheriff asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Please." Kate settled Molly in a chair beside the desk, noting how the child immediately began studying their host with the sharp intelligence of someone who'd learned early to read adult moods for signs of danger. As he prepared the coffee, Kate took inventory of their situation. The office was clean but Spartan, with none of the personal touches she'd expect from a man who'd been sheriff for any length of time. Either Jacob Hayes was remarkably unattached to possessions, or this man had been impersonating him for a very short time. "How long has Sheriff Hayes been unavailable?" she asked quietly. The man's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "About 3 weeks. He was shot during a robbery attempt. Died before the doctor could reach him." "I'm sorry." Kate meant it. "Was he a friend of yours?" A bitter smile crossed his weathered face. "You could say that. He was my younger brother." The revelation hit Kate like a physical blow. This man wasn't just impersonating a sheriff. He was impersonating his dead brother. The grief in his eyes was real, raw, and recent. "I'm so sorry," she said again, this time with the weight of true understanding. "What's your real name?" "Jacob Morrison." He handed her a cup of coffee, the liquid black as midnight and strong enough to wake the dead. "And before you ask, yes, I'm wanted." but not for the reasons on that poster. Kate sipped the coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. What are the real reasons? Jacob Morrison sat across from her, his large frame making the wooden chair creak ominously. 5 years ago, I was a lieutenant in the cavalry. My unit was assigned to escort a payroll wagon through Apache territory. We were ambushed, and when the smoke cleared, the gold was gone and half my men were dead. He paused, staring into his coffee as if it held answers to questions he'd stopped asking. The official report blamed me for poor tactical decisions, said I'd led my men into a trap through incompetence. But I knew something wasn't right. The ambush was too well coordinated, too perfectly timed. Someone had leaked our route. You investigated. I tried to. Asked too many questions, pushed too hard for answers. His smile was grimmer than winter. Turns out my commanding officer was selling information to bandits and taking a cut of the stolen payroll. When I got too close to the truth, he had me framed for the very crimes he was committing. Kate felt a chill that had nothing to do with the coffee. So you ran. What choice did I have? My word against the colonel's with planted evidence suggesting I was the traitor? Jacob's gray eyes met hers. I've been running for 5 years, taking whatever work I could find, trying to stay ahead of bounty hunters and federal marshals. And your brother. Jake was the only family I had left. When I got word he'd been made sheriff of this town, I was heading here to see him one last time before disappearing into Mexico. Jacob's voice roughened with emotion. Arrived just in time to bury him and inherit his badge. Kate understood now why he'd been so startled by her arrival. A mail-order bride was the last complication a fugitive needed. Why didn't you just leave after the funeral? Jacob glanced at Molly, who was quietly arranging her few belongings on the desk with the careful precision of a child who'd learned that possessions could disappear without warning. Because this town's got about 50 people left, and half of them are women and children. When Jake died, they lost their only protection against the kind of men who prey on isolated settlements. He met Kate's eyes again. I couldn't just abandon them. Even though staying puts you at risk. Lady, I've been at risk every day for 5 years. At least here, the danger serves a purpose. Kate felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than their shared circumstances. This was a man who understood duty, who'd chosen conscience over safety, a man her father would have respected. What about you? Jacob asked her gently. What's your real story? Kate glanced at Molly, who'd been listening with the acute attention of a child whose life depended on understanding adult conversations. How much truth could she afford to share? My father was Federal Judge Morrison Reynolds. She began, watching Jacob's eyebrows rise in recognition of the name. 3 months ago, he was investigating a pattern of fraudulent land claims across Colorado territory. Claims that were dispossessing legitimate homesteaders and giving valuable property to shell companies. Let me guess, he got too close to the truth. He discovered that the fraud went all the way to the territorial governor's office, maybe higher. Kate's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The night he planned to present his evidence to Washington federal marshals came to our house, except they weren't real federal marshals. Jacob's expression darkened. How do you know? Because I see them kill him. The words came out flat, empty of emotion. Kate had learned that feeling too much about that night led to paralysis, and paralysis meant death. Molly and I were hiding in the root cellar. We watched through the floor grates as they shot him down in cold blood. Molly's small hand found Kate's squeezing tight. The child had been there too, had seen everything. Another reason for her silence. They ransacked the house looking for the evidence, Kate continued. But Papa had been smarter than they thought. He'd hidden copies of everything in places they'd never find. And you have them. Some of them. Papa had planned for this possibility. He told me if anything happened to him, I should take Molly and certain documents and disappear until I could get them to someone trustworthy in the federal government. Jacob nodded slowly. Hence Kate Morgan, widow, seeking a new life. I thought becoming a mail-order bride would provide perfect cover. A legitimate reason to be in a remote location with a husband to provide protection and respectability. Kate managed a rueful smile. I never expected to find another fugitive. And now, Kate looked around the sparse office, then at Jacob's weathered face. This man had spent 5 years running from a false accusation, but had chosen to stay and protect a town full of strangers. a man willing to risk capture to do what was right. Now I think maybe we can help each other, she said quietly. Before Jacob could respond, the sound of hoofbeats outside made them all freeze. Multiple horses moving fast, coming to a stop directly in front of the sheriff's office. Jacob was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun. Back door, he said quietly to Kate. Take Molly and... Sheriff Hayes, a voice called from outside. We need to talk. Kate felt her blood turn to ice. She knew that voice. Deputy Marshal Thomas Blackwood, one of the men who'd killed her father. They'd found her. Jacob saw the recognition in her eyes. Friend of yours. One of my father's murderers, she breathed. Jacob's expression went hard as granite. Then I guess we're about to find out what kind of sheriff I really am. He moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 4 men. They look federal, but so did the ones who killed your father. Kate's mind raced. If Blackwood was here, it meant they'd somehow tracked her from Denver. Her carefully constructed trail of false names and misdirection had failed. She and Molly were trapped. Sheriff Hayes, Blackwood called again. We're looking for a woman and child, fugitives from federal justice. We have reason to believe they may have sought sanctuary in your town. Jacob looked at Kate, a question in his gray eyes. She could see him calculating odds, weighing his options. He could turn her over, protect his own cover live to fight another day. It would be the smart choice. Instead, he checked his gun and moved toward the door. Wait, Kate whispered urgently. You don't have to do this. They're not here for you. Jacob paused, his hand on the door handle. Lady, I've spent 5 years running from men like them. Men who twist the law to serve their own purposes, who destroy innocent lives to protect their secrets. His voice was quiet but steel hard. My brother took an oath to protect the people of this town. So did I the day I put on his badge. They'll kill you. Maybe, but they'll have to go through me to get to you and that little girl. Jacob's smile was grim but determined. Besides, I'm tired of running. Kate felt her heart clench with an emotion she didn't dare name. In 3 months of running, hiding, lying, she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone willing to stand between her and danger. What do you need me to do? Stay back. Keep Molly safe if things go bad. He gestured toward the back door. Run. Jacob straightened his vest, settled his badge, and opened the door with the confident stride of a man who belonged exactly where he was. Kate gathered Molly close and held her breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether their desperate gamble had found salvation or sealed their doom. Outside, Deputy Marshal Thomas Blackwood stood in the dusty street with 3 other men, their federal badges glinting in the harsh sunlight like warnings of the law perverted into tyranny. The man Kate was beginning to think of as her husband stepped onto the porch to meet them, and she realized that whatever happened next, she was no longer running alone. Sometimes in the most desperate circumstances, the most unlikely allies were exactly what you needed to survive. Deputy Marshal Thomas Blackwood was exactly as Kate remembered from that terrible night in Denver. Tall, lean, with the kind of cold blue eyes that belonged on a snake. He wore his federal authority like armor backed by 3 men whose hands rested casually on their weapons. Jacob stepped onto the porch with the easy confidence of a man who owned the ground he stood on. Kate had to admire his performance. Nothing in his manner suggested he was anything other than Sheriff Jacob Hayes, lawfully appointed protector of Deadwater. Gentlemen, Jacob said, his voice carrying the right note of professional courtesy mixed with territorial wariness. What brings federal marshals to my town? Blackwood's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Sheriff Hayes, we're tracking dangerous fugitives. A woman and child who murdered a federal judge in Denver 3 months ago. Catherine Reynolds and her daughter Mary. Kate felt Molly flinch at the mention of her real name. Even hidden behind the office wall, the child understood they were being hunted. Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description, Jacob replied smoothly, but I'll keep an eye out. You have photographs? Unfortunately, no, but we have detailed descriptions. Blackwood pulled a folded paper from his vest. The woman is approximately 28, dark brown hair, green eyes, about 5 feet and 6 inches. The child is 8 years old, also dark hair. They may be using false names. Kate's breath caught. The description was accurate enough to be damning, but generic enough that it could describe dozens of women in the territory. That's not much to go on, Jacob observed. Half the women in Colorado Territory have dark hair. Perhaps, but we have reason to believe they've sought sanctuary in one of the smaller settlements, places where a widow with a child might blend in easily. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, places where the local law enforcement might be sympathetic to their story. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jacob had stepped onto dangerous ground simply by not immediately offering assistance. Marshal Blackwood, Jacob said, and Kate noticed he'd gotten the man's name without being told. Either he was a very good guesser or he'd encountered Blackwood before. I've been sheriff here for over a year. I know every resident of Deadwater, and I can assure you that no strangers have taken up residence here. Kate realized Jacob was buying them time, but at what cost if Blackwood demanded to search the town? I see. Blackwood's smile never wavered, but his hand moved closer to his weapon. You wouldn't mind if we looked around, just to be thorough? I'm afraid I would mind. Jacob's voice remained conversational, but Kate heard the steel beneath it. This is a peaceful community, Marshal. My people have been through enough hardship without federal agents treating them like criminals. Surely you understand our position, Sheriff. These fugitives are extremely dangerous. The woman shot down Judge Reynolds in cold blood. According to who? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gunfight. Blackwood's mask slipped slightly, revealing the predator beneath. According to the evidence, Sheriff, evidence that will see her hang for murder. Evidence can be fabricated, Jacob said quietly. I've seen it done before. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. Was he deliberately provoking a fight against four-armed men? That's a serious accusation, Sheriff. Hayes. Blackwood's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. Are you questioning the integrity of federal law enforcement? I'm saying I've seen innocent people destroyed by men who twist the law to serve their own purposes. Jacob's hand moved to rest on his gun butt. Men who kill judges to protect their secrets, then hunt down witnesses to silence them. The accusation was like throwing a match into dry kindling. Blackwood's facade crumbled entirely, revealing the killer Kate remembered from that night in Denver. You seem remarkably well informed about this case, Sheriff. Blackwood's gun was in his hand faster than Kate would have thought possible. Almost like you have personal knowledge of events. I have personal knowledge of justice, Jacob replied, and personal experience with corrupt federal officials. The other three men had drawn their weapons now, forming a semicircle around the porch. Kate realized with sick certainty that Jacob had just signed his own death warrant to protect her and Molly. Drop your weapon, Sheriff, Blackwood ordered. You're interfering with federal business. No, Jacob said simply. I'm protecting the citizens of Deadwater from men who've forgotten what the law actually means. Kate couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let another good man die because of her father's evidence. Moving carefully, she reached for the small derringer hidden in her reticule. Mama, no, Molly whispered, speaking for the first time in months. He chose to help us. Don't make his choice meaningless. The wisdom in her 8-year-old daughter's words stopped Kate cold. Molly was right. Jacob Morrison had decided to stop running, to stand and fight for something that mattered. Interfering now would dishonor that choice, but she didn't have to let him stand alone. Marshal Blackwood, Kate called out, stepping into the doorway with her hands visible and empty. I'm the woman you're looking for. Every gun swiveled toward her. Jacob cursed under his breath. Kate, get back inside, he said without taking his eyes off Blackwood. No. Kate stepped fully onto the porch, Molly beside her, and I'm Catherine Reynolds, daughter of Federal Judge Morrison Reynolds. And these men aren't federal marshals. Shut up, Blackwood snarled, but Kate pressed on. They're the men who murdered my father because he discovered their conspiracy to steal territorial lands. I can prove it. The only thing you can prove is your own guilt, Blackwood said, but Kate heard uncertainty in his voice. This conversation was not going according to his plan. Can I? Kate reached slowly into her reticule, withdrawing a folded document. Because I have my father's notes about Deputy Marshal Thomas Blackwood, including records of your real estate purchases in the names of shell companies and copies of the falsified land claims you've been filing. Blackwood's face went white. That's impossible. We searched everywhere. You searched the house, Kate said calmly. You didn't search the church where my father hid his insurance policy. Funny thing about murdered judges, their colleagues tend to take an interest in solving the case. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Kate did have some of her father's evidence, though not as much as she was implying. But Blackwood didn't know that. Kill them both, Blackwood ordered his men. Make it look like the sheriff was resisting arrest. I wouldn't, said a new voice from across the street. Kate turned to see an older man with a deputy's badge stepping out of the general store, a shotgun cradled in his arms. Behind him, other townspeople began emerging from buildings, men, women, even some older children, all armed. Town's been watching this conversation with great interest, Marshal, the deputy said conversationally. Funny thing is, we all heard you just order the murder of our sheriff and an innocent woman. Jacob smiled grimly. Kate Molly, I'd like you to meet Deputy Bill Garrett and the citizens of Deadwater. Bill, these are the people Marshal Blackwood wants to murder for the crime of seeking justice. Blackwood spun in a circle, realizing his four men were now outnumbered by armed townspeople who'd positioned themselves with the tactical precision of an ambush. This is federal business, he shouted. You're all interfering with the law. And the law, said a woman's voice from the hotel porch, doesn't include murdering witnesses to cover up your crimes. Kate looked up to see a well-dressed woman with intelligent eyes and a Winchester rifle. Behind her stood several other women, all armed, all watching Blackwood's men with the cold assessment of people who decided which side of history they wanted to be on. Mrs. Patterson, Jacob said with a nod, glad to see you. Sheriff Hayes, well, the woman replied formally. We heard Ray's voices and thought we should investigate. Amazing what you can hear from upper-story windows when men start making threats in the street. Kate realized what had happened. The entire confrontation had been witnessed by half the town, and they'd chosen to back their sheriff against federal authority. In a territory where official corruption was common knowledge, the people of Deadwater had decided to trust the lawman they knew over the marshals they didn't. Blackwood's tactical situation had collapsed. His men were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by hostile witnesses. Killing Kate and Jacob now would require massacring the entire town, which was beyond even his resources. This isn't over, Blackwood said, holstering his weapon with obvious reluctance. We'll be back with more men, proper warrants. No, you won't, Kate interrupted, because I'm not the only copy of my father's evidence. Judge Morrison Reynolds was a careful man, Marshal Blackwood. He made sure that his death would trigger investigations you can't control or corrupt. Another bluff, but this one hit home. Blackwood's face went through several interesting color changes. You're lying. Am I care to test that theory? Kate smiled with her father's confidence. Go ahead and kill me, Marshal. See what happens when the Attorney General's office receives the sealed envelope Judge Reynolds left in the Denver First National Bank's vault. It was pure theater, but Jacob picked up the performance seamlessly. Seems to me, Marshal, you have got two choices, he said conversationally. You can try to fight your way out of town through about 30 armed citizens, possibly managing to kill Mrs. Reynolds before you die, or you can ride away and hope your conspiracy can weather whatever investigation her father set in motion. Blackwood looked around the street, assessing odds that weren't in his favor. Kate could almost see him calculating the risks. Mount up, he finally ordered his men. We're leaving. Smart choice, Jacob said. But Marshal Blackwood, if I see you in my town again, I'll assume you're here to finish murdering innocent people, and I'll respond accordingly. The threat was delivered in a conversational tone that somehow made it more menacing than if he'd shouted. Blackwood and his men mounted their horses in silence. This isn't finished, Reynolds, Blackwood said as he gathered his reins. Yes, it is, Kate replied quietly. You just don't know it yet. They rode out of Deadwater at a gallop, leaving a cloud of dust in the promise of future trouble. But for now, Kate and Molly were safe. Jacob holstered his weapon and turned to face the assembled townspeople. Thank you, he said simply. All of you. That took courage. Deputy Garrett spat tobacco juice into the dust. Hell, Sheriff. We've been waiting 3 weeks for someone to test whether you were worth following. Figure any man willing to face down 4 federal agents for strangers has earned the right to wear that badge. Mrs. Patterson approached the porch, her rifle now slung casually over her shoulder. Mrs. Morgan, is it, or should we be calling you something else? Kate felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It's Kate Reynolds, ma'am. I apologize for the deception. No apology needed, dear. We've all told lies to survive. The older woman's eyes were kind but shrewd. The question now is what you plan to do next. Those men will be back, and next time they'll bring an army. Kate looked at Jacob, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his gray eyes. Blackwood would indeed return with overwhelming force. Their desperate gamble had bought them time, nothing more. "We'll figure something out," Jacob said. "We always do." But Kate was already forming a plan, one that would require courage from all of them and might just end the threat permanently. She'd spent 3 months running from her father's killers. Maybe it was time to start hunting them instead. As the townspeople dispersed and normal life resumed in Deadwater, Kate realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time since her father's death, she wasn't alone. She had allies, protectors, people willing to stand with her against overwhelming odds. She had something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. "Jacob," she said quietly as they watched the dust settle on Main Street. "Yes, thank you for all of it." He looked at her with those intelligent gray eyes, seeing too much and understanding even more. "Kate, yes. I think we're going to need a better plan than hoping they don't come back." Kate smiled, feeling something like hope kindle in her chest for the first time in months. "I think you're right, and I think I know exactly how to give them a welcome they'll never forget." 3 weeks after the confrontation with Blackwood, Deadwater had transformed from a dying mining town into something that resembled a military encampment. Under Jacob's direction, the residents had fortified their community with the methodical precision of people who understood that preparation meant survival. Kate discovered that her fake husband possessed knowledge that went far beyond basic law enforcement. He'd positioned lookouts on the surrounding hills, established supply caches at strategic points, and turned the town's scattered buildings into interlocking fields of fire that would make any assault costly. "You learned this in the cavalry?" Kate asked as they walked the perimeter at sunset, checking the watch schedules he'd established. "Some of it." Jacob adjusted the position of a water barrel they'd placed for emergency firefighting. "The rest I picked up during 5 years of avoiding capture. You learn to think tactically when your life depends on it." Molly trotted along beside them, chattering in a way that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. The child who'd been silent since witnessing her grandfather's murder had found her voice again in the safety of Deadwater, though she still stayed close to Kate and Jacob. "Mr. Jacob," Molly said, using the name she'd settled on despite Kate's gentle corrections about calling him Sheriff Hayes. "Mrs. Patterson says the lookouts can see all the way to Copper Creek. Is that far enough?" "Far enough to give us warning," Jacob replied seriously, treating her question with the gravity it deserved. "But Molly, what do you do if the alarm bell rings?" "I go to the church cellar with the other children and wait for Mama or you to come get me," she recited dutifully. "That's right. And what if neither of us can come?" Molly's face grew solemn. "I wait for Mrs. Patterson or Deputy Garrett, and I don't come out until I hear the all-clear signal." "Good girl." Kate watched this exchange with emotions she didn't dare examine too closely. Jacob had stepped naturally into the role of protector and teacher for Molly, showing infinite patience with her questions and genuine concern for her safety. He was becoming the father figure Kate had never expected to find, and Molly was responding with the trust of a child who'd learned to recognize strength and kindness. "Jacob," Kate said as they completed their circuit and headed back toward the sheriff's office, "I need to tell you about the rest of my father's evidence." He glanced at her with those perceptive gray eyes. "You mean there's more than you told Blackwood?" "There's more, but also less." Kate checked to make sure Molly was distracted by a butterfly before continuing. "I do have documents proving the land fraud conspiracy, but they're not as comprehensive as I implied, and there's no insurance policy hidden in a bank vault." "I figured as much, but it was a good bluff. The problem is what I have isn't enough to bring down the whole conspiracy. It would implicate Blackwood and a few others, but not the territorial officials who are really running the operation." Jacob nodded thoughtfully. "So we hurt them, but don't finish them, which means they'll keep coming." "Exactly. Unless—" Kate hesitated, then forged ahead. "Unless we can get the rest of the evidence my father gathered." "Where is it?" "Hidden in Judge Reynolds' private chambers in the Denver courthouse. Papa was paranoid about keeping his most important documents in multiple locations. The really damaging evidence, the stuff that would expose Governor Crawford and his associates, is locked in a safe he had installed in his office." Jacob stopped walking. "You want to go back to Denver?" "I want us to go to Denver," Kate corrected. "Together, with enough evidence to destroy Blackwood's conspiracy completely." "Kate, that's—" Jacob ran a hand through his hair. "That's suicide. Denver is their stronghold. They'll have every approach watched. Not necessarily. Kate had been thinking about this for days, refining her plan with each consideration. They think I'm cornered here in Deadwater, waiting for them to come back with reinforcements. They won't expect me to return to the scene of the crime. And if you're wrong, then we die fighting instead of waiting to be slaughtered. Kate's voice was steady, but Jacob heard the fear beneath it. Jacob, I've seen what these men are capable of. They murdered my father in cold blood. If we don't stop them now, they'll come back with enough men to burn this entire town to the ground. Molly looked up from her butterfly watching. Are we talking about the bad men again? Yes, sweetheart, Kate said. We're trying to figure out how to stop them permanently. Can't we just go to the really big sheriff? Molly asked with 8-year-old logic. The one who's in charge of all the other sheriffs. Kate and Jacob exchanged glances. Out of the mouths of babes. The problem, little one, Jacob explained gently, is that some of the really big sheriffs are working with the bad men. We can't be sure who to trust. What about the army? Molly persisted. Soldiers have to protect people, right? That's what you said when you told me about being a soldier. Jacob went very still. Kate watched his face cycle through surprise, hope, and calculation. Molly, you might just be a genius, he said slowly. What are you thinking? Kate asked. Fort Carson. It's about 40 miles south of Denver, and I know the commanding officer. Colonel James Mitchell was my superior before everything went wrong. He's one of the few men in this territory I'd trust with my life. You think he'd help? If I can prove my innocence and show him evidence of a conspiracy involving federal officials, Jim Mitchell would march on Denver with a full company of cavalry. Jacob's expression was grim but determined. The question is whether we can reach him alive. Kate felt the familiar flutter of fear mixed with hope. It was a long shot, but it was better than waiting in Deadwater for Blackwood to return with overwhelming force. When do we leave? She asked. Jacob's eyebrows rose. Kate, you and Molly should stay here where it's safe. Safe? Kate laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jacob, there is no safe for us anymore. Blackwood will never stop hunting us, and he'll kill anyone who gets in his way. The only safety we have is in ending this conspiracy permanently. She's right, you know. They turned to see Deputy Garrett approaching from the direction of the saloon, his expression serious. Bill, Jacob said, how long have you been listening? Long enough, and I agree with Mrs. Reynolds. Those federal boys will be back with enough guns to turn Deadwater into a graveyard. Our only chance is hitting them first and hitting them hard. Kate felt a surge of gratitude for the grizzled deputy who'd become their most trusted ally. What do you suggest? Jacob asked. I suggest you take Mrs. Reynolds and Miss Molly to Fort Carson while the rest of us keep up the pretense that you're still here. Buy you time to reach Colonel Mitchell's and get help. Bill, that would put the whole town at risk. Sheriff, this whole town's already at risk. At least this way we go down fighting for something that matters instead of just waiting to die. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that all carried terrible consequences. There's another problem, he said finally. Even if we reach Fort Carson safely, even if Colonel Mitchell believes me and agrees to help, we still need that evidence from Judge Reynolds' safe. And I can't ask federal troops to break into a courthouse based on my word alone. Kate had been thinking about this too. What if we didn't break in? What do you mean? And what if we were invited in? Kate's smile was sharp as broken glass. Thomas Blackwood isn't the only corrupt federal official involved in this conspiracy, but he might not be the highest-ranking one either. Jacob's eyes widened as he understood her implication. You want to flip someone? I want to offer someone a deal they can't refuse. Immunity in exchange for cooperation. Kate's voice carried her father's confidence in the power of justice properly applied. The Territorial Attorney General's office has to have someone clean enough to cut a deal with, someone who values their career more than their criminal associates. That's actually brilliant, Jacob said slowly, but it would require perfect timing and a lot of luck. Most good plans do. Kate looked at Molly, who was listening with the intense concentration of a child who understood that adult decisions would determine her future. The question is, are you willing to risk it? Jacob studied Kate's face in the fading light, seeing determination mixed with fear, but no hesitation. This woman had lost her father, fled her home, and placed herself and her daughter in mortal danger to seek justice. She wasn't going to stop now, with or without his help. "When do we leave?" he asked. Kate's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Tonight, before Blackwood has time to organize his reinforcements." "Tonight," Deputy Garrett looked alarmed. "That doesn't give us much time to prepare." "Time is what we don't have," Kate said. "Every day we wait gives them another day to strengthen their position. We go tonight, reach Fort Carson by tomorrow afternoon, and pray Colonel Mitchell is the man Jacob thinks he is." As if summoned by their conversation, Mrs. Patterson appeared from the direction of the hotel, carrying a large bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Supplies," she announced without preamble. "Food, medical kit, ammunition, and winter clothes. Figured you'd need them for wherever you're planning to go." Jacob stared at her. "How did you team?" "Sheriff Hayes, I've been eavesdropping on important conversations since before you were born. Don't look so surprised." Mrs. Patterson's smile was maternal but steel-edged. "The question is, do you have a plan that doesn't get you all killed?" "We're working on it," Kate said. "Then work faster, because I just received word from my contacts in Denver." Mrs. Patterson's expression grew grave. "Blackwood left Deadwater 3 days ago, but he didn't go back to Denver. He went to Cheyenne, to the territorial governor's mansion." Kate felt ice form in her stomach. If Blackwood was conferring with Governor Crawford directly, it meant the conspiracy was mobilizing resources beyond anything they'd imagined. "How long before he comes back?" Jacob asked. 2 days, maybe 3. But when he comes, he won't be bringing marshals." Mrs. Patterson's voice was flat with certainty. "He'll be bringing the territorial militia." The militia. Kate's blood ran cold. 50 or 60 armed men with military training and legal authority to act anywhere in the territory. Against that kind of force, Deadwater's brave but amateur defenders wouldn't stand a chance. "We leave in an hour," Jacob decided. "Bill starts spreading the word that we're planning to fortify the church. Make it look like we're preparing for a siege. And if someone asks where you are, tell them I'm scouting defensive positions in the hills." Jacob's smile was grim. "By the time they figure out we're gone, we'll either be at Fort Carson or dead on the trail." As the adults dispersed to make final preparations, Molly tugged on Kate's skirt. "Mama." "Yes, sweetheart." "Are we going to be safe after this adventure?" Kate knelt down to her daughter's level, looking into eyes that held too much knowledge for an 8-year-old. "I don't know, Molly, but we're going to try to make it so you never have to be afraid of bad men again." Molly nodded solemnly. "Good, because I like it here with Mr. Jacob and the other people. I want to stay." Kate's throat tightened with emotion. For the first time in months, Molly was thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. That alone made the risk worthwhile. "We'll do everything we can to come back," Kate promised. Together, Kate looked across the street to where Jacob was conferring with Deputy Garrett, his weathered face serious but determined. A man who'd chosen to stop running to stand and fight for something that mattered. Together, she agreed, but as they prepared for a journey that would either save them all or destroy them completely, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that they were riding toward a confrontation that would test more than their courage. They were riding toward a reckoning that would determine not just their survival, but their souls. They left Deadwater in the dead of night, 3 Shentos slipping away from a sleeping town under a canopy of stars that seemed too bright for such dangerous business. Jacob led the way on his bay gelding, followed by Kate and Molly, sharing a sturdy mare that Mrs. Patterson had somehow acquired on short notice. The first 20 miles passed in tense silence, broken only by the soft rhythm of hoofbeats on the old mining trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. Jacob set a careful pace, fast enough to put distance between them and any pursuit slow enough to preserve the horses for what might be a very long chase. "How much farther to the main road?" Kate asked quietly as they paused to rest the horses by a small stream. "About 5 miles, but we're not taking the main road." Jacob checked his pocket watch by moonlight. "Too exposed. We'll follow the old cattle trails through the foothills. It'll take longer, but we're less likely to run into anyone who might report seeing us." Molly had dozed off in the saddle, secure in Kate's arms. The child's trust in their ability to protect her was both humbling and terrifying. "Jacob," Kate said, watching him scan the trail behind them with practiced wariness, "what if Colonel Mitchell doesn't believe you? What if he thinks you really are the traitor they've painted you as? Then we'll be arrested, tried, and probably hanged." Jacob's matter-of-fact tone made the words even more chilling. But I don't think that'll happen. Jim Mitchell was the one who recommended me for promotion before everything went wrong. He knows the kind of man I was. Jacob's smile was rueful. 5 years of running changes a person, Kate. I've done things I'm not proud of to stay alive and free. Jim will see those changes. Will he see the man who risked everything to protect strangers? The man who faced down 4 federal agents to save a woman and child he'd known for less than a day? Jacob was quiet for a moment. I hope so. They remounted and continued deeper into the wilderness, following trails that seemed to exist only in Jacob's memory. Kate found herself studying her protector's profile in the moonlight, seeing strength tempered by conscience, determination shadowed by old pain. This man had lost everything to a false accusation, spent 5 years as a fugitive, and was now risking the life he'd rebuilt to help her seek justice for her father. Whatever he'd been before, whatever mistakes he thought he'd made, Kate was certain of one thing: Jacob Morrison was the best man she'd ever known. Dawn found them in high country, following a ridge trail that offered spectacular views of the Colorado Territory spread out below like a map drawn in gold and green. In the distance, the smoke of Denver was visible as a dark smudge against the morning sky. Fort Carson should be visible from the next ridge, Jacob said, as they shared a breakfast of cold biscuits and water. We'll reach it by mid-afternoon if we don't run into trouble. What kind of trouble? Kate asked. Patrol units, mostly. The Army's been keeping a close watch on the territory since the Apache troubles started up again. Jacob's expression was thoughtful. Could work in our favor, actually. If we encounter a patrol, we can ask for escort to the fort. They broke camp quickly and resumed their journey, pushing through stands of pine and across meadows brilliant with wildflowers. Molly had awakened in better spirits, chattering about the wildlife they encountered and asking endless questions about their destination. Is Colonel Mitchell nice? She asked as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. He's fair, Jacob replied carefully. He believes in doing what's right even when it's difficult. Like you. Jacob glanced back with something that might have been surprise. I suppose. Mama says you're the bravest person she knows. She told Mrs. Patterson that you're a good man who's been hurt by bad people, but it didn't make you bad, too. Kate felt heat rise in her cheeks. She hadn't realized Molly had overheard that conversation. Your mama's too kind, Jacob said, but Kate heard something in his voice that sounded like gratitude. Are you going to marry Mama for real? Molly asked with the devastating directness of childhood. Both adults went very still. It was Jacob who finally answered. That would be up to your mama, Miss Molly. But I can tell you that I'd be honored to be part of your family. Kate's heart did something complicated in her chest. In the midst of running for their lives, surrounded by danger on all sides, this man was talking about family and honor as if they were real possibilities instead of impossible dreams. I think she wants you too, Molly announced with satisfaction. She smiles different when she looks at you. Before Kate could formulate a response to this mortifying observation, Jacob raised his hand for silence. Riders, he said quietly, coming up the back trail, moving fast. Kate turned in her saddle, scanning the ridge behind them. Sure enough, dust was rising from the direction they'd come, too much dust for a single rider. How many? She asked, fighting to keep fear out of her voice for Molly's sake. 4, maybe 5, and they're pushing their horses hard. Jacob's face was grim. Could be innocent travelers, but we can't afford to assume that. Kate understood. What do we do? Jacob studied the terrain ahead, calculating distances and options with the tactical mind that had kept him alive for 5 years. There's a box canyon about a mile ahead. Good defensive position, but only one way out. He paused. Or we can try to outrun them to Fort Carson. Can we make it? Not with the horses this tired, and not with Molly riding double. Jacob's honesty was brutal, but necessary. If those are Blackwood's men, they'll catch us in the open. Kate felt the familiar cold knot of terror form in her stomach. Once again, they were being hunted. Once again, she had to choose between impossible options. The canyon, she decided. If we're going to fight, at least let's choose the ground. Jacob nodded approvingly. Good choice, but Kate, if this goes bad... I know. Kate's voice was steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Molly and I will find somewhere safe to hide. No, Molly said firmly. If there's fighting, I want to help. Sweetheart, you're 8 years old. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. Molly's young face was set with determination that reminded Kate painfully of her father. The bad men killed Grandpapa because he was trying to help people. Now they're trying to kill you and Mama. That makes it my fight, too. Jacob looked at the child with something like respect. Miss Molly, if it comes to fighting, the best way you can help is by staying safe and letting the adults handle the danger. But what if the adults get hurt? The question hung in the air between them, innocent but loaded with terrible possibilities. Kate realized that Molly had already lost one protector to violence. The child was terrified of losing another. Then you run, Jacob said gently but firmly. You find the soldiers and tell them what happened. Can you remember the way to Fort Carson? Molly nodded solemnly. Follow the ridge trail to the valley, then go toward the mountains with snow on top. That's right. You're a very smart little girl, Miss Molly. They reached the canyon just as their pursuers came into view on the ridge behind them. 5 men riding hard, and Kate recognized the lean figure in the lead. Blackwood, she put in. Jacob's expression went flat and deadly. He must have left scouts watching the trails out of Deadwater, figured out we'd run for Fort Carson. The canyon was everything Jacob had promised. High walls, good sight lines, and only one entrance. It was also, Kate realized with sick certainty, a perfect trap if they couldn't hold the mouth. There, Jacob said, pointing to a cluster of boulders that commanded the canyon entrance. We can cover the trail from there. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses deeper into the canyon where they'd be protected from stray bullets. Jacob checked his weapons with the methodical care of someone who'd faced desperate odds before. How many rounds do you have? He asked Kate. 12. She showed him the small revolver she'd been carrying since Denver. Make them count. And Kate, don't hesitate. These men will kill us all without blinking. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, growing louder with each passing second. Kate positioned herself behind a boulder, sighting down the barrel of her pistol at the canyon mouth. Remember, Jacob said quietly, we just need to hold them until... The sharp crack of a rifle shot cut him off. A bullet spanged off the rock beside Kate's head, showering her with stone chips. Cover, Jacob shouted, returning fire with his Winchester. The battle for their lives had begun. The gunfight in the canyon was nothing like the romanticized duels Kate had read about in dime novels. It was a desperate, chaotic exchange of bullets and shouted commands, punctuated by the whine of ricochets and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Jacob fought with the calm precision of a professional soldier, choosing his targets carefully and making every shot count. Kate discovered that 3 months of running for her life had given her a steadiness under fire that surprised her. Her first shot took one of Blackwood's men in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Nice shooting, Jacob called out as he levered another round into his rifle. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. Blackwood's men had positioned themselves among the rocks at the canyon mouth, using their superior numbers to maintain a steady rate of fire that kept Kate and Jacob pinned almost down. We can't hold them forever, Kate said during a brief lull in the shooting. We don't have to, just long enough for... The sound of a bugle cut through the canyon air like a sword through silk. Kate looked up to see blue uniformed cavalry cresting the ridge above them, their weapons trained on Blackwood's position. Federal marshals, a voice called out. Throw down your weapons and surrender. We are federal marshals, Blackwood shouted back. Those people are fugitives from justice. Interesting, came the reply, because according to our information, you're Thomas Blackwood wanted for the murder of federal Judge Morrison Reynolds. Kate's heart leaped. Someone had gotten word to the authorities. Someone had believed her story. The cavalry officer who rode down into the canyon was a man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent blue eyes. He approached their position with his sidearm drawn but not directly threatening. Ma'am, are you Catherine Reynolds? He asked Kate formally. I am. I'm Major Harrison Fort Carson. We've been looking for you, we dare you. His gaze shifted to Jacob. And you would be the man calling himself Sheriff Jacob Hayes. Actually, Jacob said, rising slowly from cover with his hands visible, I'm Lieutenant Jacob Morrison, formerly of the 5th Cavalry. I believe Colonel Mitchell is expecting me. Major Harrison's expression shifted to something like recognition. Well, I'll be damned. Jake Morrison. Jim said you were dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Jacob replied with a tired smile, though not by much. The surrender of Blackwood's surviving men happened with surprising anticlimactic efficiency. Without their leader, who had been shot trying to escape, they offered no resistance to federal troops who clearly knew exactly who they were dealing with. "How did you find us?" Kate asked as they prepared to ride to Fort Carson under military escort. "Your friend Deputy Garrett sent word through Army telegraph," Major Harrison explained. "Told us about federal marshals making threats against civilians and asked us to investigate. Lucky thing, too, because we'd been tracking Blackwood's gang for 2 weeks." Kate felt a wave of gratitude for the grizzled deputy who'd risked everything to help them escape. "What about the corruption investigation?" she asked. "All in good time, ma'am. First, let's get you somewhere safe. Then Colonel Mitchell will want to hear your story." As they rode toward Fort Carson with a full cavalry escort, Kate realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. The immediate danger was over. Blackwood was dead, his men captured, and she was under the protection of federal troops who knew the truth about her father's murder. But questions remain. How far did the conspiracy reach? Who else was involved? And most importantly for Kate's heart, what happened next for a fugitive mother, a wanted man, and the little girl who'd brought them together, Jacob? She said quietly as they approached the fort's gates. "Yes, when this is all over, when the investigations are finished and the trials are done, what then?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, watching Molly ride beside them with the wide-eyed excitement of a child seeing her first military fort. "I was thinking maybe a real wedding," he said finally. "If you'll have me." Kate's heart did that complicated thing again. Joy mixed with fear and hope, tangled with uncertainty. "Are you proposing to me while under arrest?" "Technically, we're being escorted, not arrested." Jacob's smile was soft and genuine. "And yes, I suppose I am. Kate Reynolds, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? For real this time?" Before Kate could answer, Molly spoke up from her horse. "Say yes, Mama. We already decided we want to keep him." Kate laughed despite everything. The danger, the uncertainty, the impossible situation they were in. This man had risked his life to protect her, and Molly had chosen justice over safety, had shown her what it meant to stand for something worth defending. "Yes," she said, feeling like she was leaping off a cliff into an unknown future. "Yes, Jacob Morrison, I'll marry you." "Good," Molly announced with satisfaction. "Now we can be a real family." As they rode through the gates of Fort Carson, Kate realized that her daughter was right. Somewhere between desperate deception and dangerous alliance, they'd become something neither of the adults had expected. They'd become home. Colonel James Mitchell was exactly what Kate had expected from Jacob's descriptions. A man in his early 50s with silver hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd seen enough of the world to judge it accurately. His office was spartanly furnished, but comfortable with maps covering one wall and a sense of quiet competence pervading everything. "Lieutenant Morris," he said as Jacob was escorted into the room, "when I received word that you were alive, I wasn't sure whether to celebrate or prepare for disappointment." "I understand, sir. 5 years is a long time." "Indeed it is. Long enough for a good man to go bad or for a bad situation to reveal a man's true character." Mitchell gestured to chairs arranged around a small table. "Please sit, all of you. Miss Molly, there are books on that shelf if you'd like something to look at while the adults talk." Kate was impressed by the colonel's thoughtfulness in including Molly without making her feel excluded from important conversations. "Now then," Mitchell continued as they settled themselves, "I've read the preliminary reports from Major Harrison. Quite a story. Federal marshals turning to murder territorial officials involved in massive land fraud, and my supposedly dead former lieutenant protecting witnesses in a one-horse town." His eyes met Jacob's. "The question is, how much of it can you prove?" "Some of it, sir. Mrs. Reynolds has documents from her father's investigation. I have testimony about the original cavalry payroll robbery that led to my false conviction." Jacob's voice was steady, but Kate heard the underlying tension. Everything depended on this man's judgment. "And I have something else," Kate added, reaching into her traveling bag. "I have my father's personal journal, including his correspondence with other federal judges about suspicious patterns in territorial land claims." She placed the leather-bound journal on the table. Colonel Mitchell opened it carefully, reading several pages with increasing interest. "Judge Reynolds was building a case against territorial officials." "Yes, sir. And he'd identified the connection between federal marshals like Blackwood and the shell companies filing fraudulent claims." Kate's voice grew stronger as she spoke. My father died because he was going to expose a conspiracy that reaches all the way to the territorial governor's office. Mitchell continued reading, occasionally making notes on a piece of paper. The silence stretched until Kate began to worry they'd lost him. Mrs. Reynolds, he said finally, this journal mentions safes in your father's courthouse chambers. Documents that would provide definitive proof of the allegations. Yes, sir. Papa was very careful about documentation. He said judges who fight corruption have to be above reproach in their evidence. And these documents are still in Denver. Kate nodded. As far as I know, unless the conspirators have found a way to access Papa's private safe. Colonel Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Here's what we're going to do. I'm sending a telegram to the Attorney General's office in Washington requesting federal investigators to examine Judge Reynolds' chambers under military protection. If we can secure that evidence, we can bring down the whole conspiracy, Jacob finished. Precisely. But it will take time and there are still dangers. Governor Crawford has considerable influence, and if he realizes we're closing in on him, Mitchell didn't need to finish the threat. Colonel, Kate said carefully, there's something else you should know. Deputy Marshal Blackwood mentioned territorial militia when he was threatening our town. If Governor Crawford is willing to use military force against civilians, then we need to move quickly and carefully. Mitchell's expression grew grim. Territorial militia answers to the governor, not to federal authority. If he's desperate enough to use them against his own people. A knock at the office door interrupted the conversation. A young sergeant entered with a telegram in his hand. Sir, urgent message from Washington. Mitchell read the telegram quickly, his expression growing increasingly serious. Gentlemen, Mrs. Reynolds, we have a problem. Federal investigators were dispatched to examine Judge Reynolds' chambers 3 days ago. He looked up from the paper. They found the safes opened and emptied. All the documents are gone. Kate felt the bottom drop out of her world. Gone, but how? According to this, someone with federal authority ordered the chambers sealed immediately after Judge Reynolds' death. All contents were removed for security purposes and transferred to territorial custody. Governor Crawford, Jacob said flatly. He's had the evidence all along. So it appears. Mitchell set down the telegram with careful precision, which means our proof of conspiracy is in the hands of the conspirators themselves. Kate stared at the telegram as if it had personally betrayed her. 3 months of running, hiding, risking her daughter's life, all for evidence that had been stolen before she'd even begun her flight. That's it then, she said quietly. We have nothing. No proof, no case, no justice for my father. On the contrary, said a new voice from the doorway, you have something much more valuable than documents. They turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit entering the office flanked by 2 federal agents. He had the kind of smooth confidence that suggested Washington politics in serious authority. Allow me to introduce myself, the man said with a slight bow. Assistant Attorney General William Hartley. And Mrs. Reynolds, you have exactly what we need to destroy Governor Crawford's conspiracy. Kate stared at him in confusion. I don't understand. You just said the evidence was stolen. The documentary evidence, yes, but you forget, my dear lady. You witnessed your father's murder. Your testimony combined with what we've learned from other sources is enough to hang every man involved in this conspiracy. Hope flickered in Kate's chest, but she was afraid to trust it. What other sources? Hartley's smile was sharp as winter. Governor Crawford isn't as careful as he thinks. We've been monitoring territorial telegraph communications for months. We know about the land frauds, the payments to federal marshals, even the planned use of territorial militia against civilians. You knew all along, Jacob's voice carried a dangerous edge. You knew about the conspiracy and let Judge Reynolds die. Lieutenant Morrison, we suspected corruption, but had no proof until Judge Reynolds' murder forced the conspirators to reveal themselves. Hartley's expression became grave. Your flight from Deadwater, the pursuit by false marshals, the attempt to use military force against civilians, it all gave us the evidence we needed to act. Kate felt a mixture of relief and anger. So my father died to expose their crimes. Your father died because he was a good man fighting evil. But his death will have meaning if we can use it to bring justice. Colonel Mitchell had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. You want Mrs. Reynolds to testify before a federal grand jury. More than that, We want her to help us catch Governor Crawford in the act of conspiracy. Hartley's eyes gleamed with the anticipation of a hunter closing in on prey. We want her to offer to sell him her father's evidence. The audacity of the proposal took Kate's breath away. You want me to go back to Denver to meet with the man who ordered my father's murder, under federal protection with agents positioned to record every word he says. Hartley leaned forward. Mrs. Reynolds, we have enough evidence to arrest the smaller players in this conspiracy, but Governor Crawford is too careful, too well protected by legal immunity. We need him to incriminate himself directly. Kate looked at Jacob, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his gray eyes. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also the only way to ensure that her father's killers faced justice. What about my daughter? She asked. Miss Molly would remain here at the fort under military protection until the operation is complete. Molly looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. Mama, what's an operation? It's when adults do dangerous things to catch bad people, sweetheart. Are you going to catch the man who hurt Grandpapa? Kate's throat tightened. We're going to try. Molly nodded solemnly. Good. Grandpapa would want the bad man to be punished. Mrs. Reynolds, Hartley said gently, I won't lie to you about the risks. If Governor Crawford suspects a trap, if our agents are discovered, if any one of a dozen things goes wrong, you could end up like your father. But if it works, we'll have enough evidence to prosecute every man involved in this conspiracy. Federal marshals, territorial officials, even the governor himself. Hartley's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Justice for your father and safety for you and your daughter. Kate looked around the room, at Colonel Mitchell with his steady competence, at Assistant Attorney General Hartley with his sharp intelligence, at Jacob with his unwavering support, and finally at Molly with her 8-year-old faith that adults could make the world safe for children. What do you need me to do? She asked. 3 days later, Kate stood in the parlor of the finest hotel in Denver, wearing a dress that cost more than most people earned in a month and jewelry borrowed from the federal evidence locker. To any observer, she looked like a woman who'd come into significant money and wanted the world to know it. The transformation had been Hartley's idea. Governor Crawford won't deal with a desperate fugitive, he'd explained, but he might be interested in a wealthy widow who claims to have evidence for sale. Kate's new identity was Mrs. Catherine Morgan recently arrived from San Francisco with a fortune made in railroad investments and a desire to settle in Colorado territory. She'd taken rooms at the hotel under this name, made conspicuous purchases at expensive shops, and generally established herself as exactly the kind of person Governor Crawford liked to do business with. The federal agents watching her were invisible but present. Hartley himself was registered in the room next door, monitoring every conversation through listening devices that represented the latest in surveillance technology. Mrs. Morgan, a hotel clerk, appeared at her elbow. Governor Crawford's private secretary is here to see you. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs, but she managed a gracious smile. Please show him in. The secretary was a thin, nervous man who clearly knew more about his employer's business than was comfortable. He accepted Kate's offer of tea with shaking hands. Governor Crawford understands you have certain material that might be of interest, he began carefully. I have documents that formerly belonged to the late Judge Morrison Reynolds, Kate replied, matching his careful tone. Documents that detail certain business opportunities in territorial land development. The secretary's relief was visible. They were speaking the same coded language. The governor would be very interested in examining such materials, perhaps with a view to ensuring they don't fall into the wrong hands. I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. Kate sipped her tea with a steady hand. When would be convenient for the governor? Tonight, if possible. At his private residence. He prefers to conduct such business away from official channels. Kate nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. Of course. Shall we say 8 o'clock? Perfect. The governor will look forward to meeting you. As the secretary left, Kate allowed herself a moment of fierce satisfaction. Governor Crawford was taking the bait. By tomorrow morning, he would either be under arrest for conspiracy and murder, or she would be dead. Either way, the waiting would be over. That evening, as Kate prepared for what might be the last gamble of her life, she thought about her father. Judge Morrison Reynolds had spent his career fighting corruption and protecting the innocent. If she could complete his work, if she could bring his killers to justice, then maybe his death would have meaning beyond the pain it had caused. She thought about Jacob waiting at Fort Carson with Molly, both of them depending on her success for their future safety and happiness. She thought about the townspeople of Deadwater who had risked everything to protect strangers simply because it was right. And she thought about all the innocent homesteaders who had lost their land to Crawford's conspiracy, all the families destroyed by greed and corruption. She was going to end this tonight, one way or another. Governor Richard Crawford's mansion sat on a hill overlooking Denver like a monument to territorial power and ambition. As Kate's hired carriage wound up the circular drive, she could see lights blazing in every window, a display of wealth meant to intimidate visitors and remind them of their host's importance. The butler who answered the door was clearly more than domestic staff. His eyes assessed Kate with professional thoroughness before admitting her to a parlor decorated with the kind of opulence that screamed newly acquired wealth. "Mrs. Morgan," Crawford said, rising from a leather chair that probably cost more than most men earned in a year. "Welcome to Denver. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory." Governor Crawford was younger than Kate had expected, perhaps 45, with the kind of polished handsomeness that served politicians well. But his eyes held the cold calculation of a man who'd built his career on other people's misfortunes. "Quite satisfactory, thank you," Kate replied, accepting his offer of brandy despite her nerves. "I understand you're interested in certain historical documents." "I'm always interested in historical accuracy," Crawford said smoothly, "particularly when it concerns the late Judge Reynolds. A tragic loss to the territory." "Indeed, Papa spoke very highly of territorial governance." The lie came easily. He believed strongly in cooperation between federal and territorial authorities. Crawford's relief was almost palpable. Clearly, he'd been worried about what Judge Reynolds might have told his daughter. "Your father was a wise man. It's unfortunate that his death has created certain complications regarding his research materials." "Oh, but it hasn't," Kate said with carefully calculated brightness. "Papa was very thorough in his documentation. I have complete copies of all his territorial investigations." Crawford went very still. "All of them. Every file, every correspondence, every piece of evidence he gathered during his years on the federal bench." Kate sipped her brandy, playing the role of a woman who didn't understand the implications of what she possessed. "Quite fascinating reading, actually. I had no idea territorial development was such complex business." "Mrs. Morgan," Crawford said carefully, "those documents could be misinterpreted by people who don't understand the complexities of frontier governance." "Could they?" Kate widened her eyes with feigned innocence. "I certainly wouldn't want Papa's work to cause problems. Perhaps you could help me understand which documents might be sensitive." Crawford moved to his desk, withdrawing a leather portfolio. "I took the liberty of acquiring the materials from your father's chambers after his death. For security purposes, you understand." Kate's blood ran cold as she recognized her father's handwriting on the documents Crawford spread across the table. These were the missing papers from Judge Reynolds' safe, the evidence that could have brought down the conspiracy months ago. "I see you've been quite thorough in preserving Papa's legacy," she managed. "Indeed, but I understand you may have additional materials that weren't in the official files." This was the moment of truth. Kate reached into her reticule, withdrawing a folder that contained a mixture of real documents and carefully crafted forgeries prepared by federal agents. "Papa kept copies of everything at home," she said. "He never trusted official channels completely." Crawford's eyes lit up as he examined the documents. Kate watched him catalog each piece of evidence that could implicate him in land fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. "These are quite comprehensive," he said finally. "Mrs. Morgan, I think we can come to an arrangement that serves everyone's interests." "What sort of arrangement?" Kate kept her voice innocent, but her heart was hammering. "I'm prepared to purchase these documents for a substantial sum. Shall we say $50,000? Kate pretended to consider this offer while silently counting the seconds until federal agents would move in to make arrests. According to Hartley's plan, they needed Crawford to explicitly admit to criminal activity before taking action. "That's very generous," she said slowly. "But I'm curious, why are these particular documents so valuable to you?" Crawford's mask slipped slightly. "Mrs. Morgan, there are certain business arrangements That required discretion. Your father's investigation, while thorough, didn't always understand the nuances of territorial development. You mean the shell companies Papa wrote about, the ones buying land through fraudulent claims? Your father was a federal judge, Mrs. Morgan. He didn't understand that territorial growth sometimes requires creative approaches to land acquisition. Crawford's voice hardened. Men like Thomas Blackwood were patriots working to ensure American control over valuable resources. Kate felt ice form in her veins. Thomas Blackwood, Papa wrote that he was killed during an arrest. Blackwood died serving his country, eliminating threats to territorial security. Crawford's eyes were cold as winter. Your father, unfortunately, became such a threat. There it was, the admission they needed. Crawford had just confessed to ordering her father's murder. I see, Kate said quietly, and if I refuse to sell these documents. Crawford's smile was sharp as a knife. Mrs. Morgan, I hope that won't be necessary. Federal judges who investigate territorial business sometimes suffer tragic accidents. It would be unfortunate if that tradition continued. The threat was clear and unambiguous. Crawford was willing to kill her just as he'd killed her father. Kate was about to respond when the sound of shattering glass erupted from multiple windows simultaneously. Federal agents poured into the room with weapons drawn surrounding Crawford before he could reach for the gun Kate now noticed in his desk drawer. Governor Richard Crawford, Assistant Attorney General Hartley announced as he entered behind the agents, "You're under arrest for conspiracy fraud in the murder of federal Judge Morrison Reynolds." Crawford's face cycled through surprise, rage, and finally cold calculation. "You have no proof. This woman's testimony won't stand up in federal court." On the contrary, Hartley smiled, producing a recording device from his coat. "We have your complete confession recorded on the latest phonograph equipment. Your own words admitting to ordering Judge Reynolds' death." Crawford's composure cracked completely. "You can't use that in court. I was entrapped." "Actually, we can. Federal law is quite clear about recording criminal confessions during the commission of ongoing crimes." Hartley's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Your attempt to bribe Mrs. Reynolds for evidence constitutes obstruction of justice, which makes this an active criminal investigation." As federal agents led Crawford away in shackles, Kate felt a weight she'd carried for months finally lift from her shoulders. Her father's killer had confessed. Justice would be served. "Mrs. Reynolds," Hartley said as the room cleared, "you did extraordinarily well. Your father would be proud." Kate managed a shaky smile. "Is it really over?" "The trials will take time, but yes, the conspiracy is broken. Governor Crawford, his associates in the territorial government, and the remaining members of Blackwood's organization will all face federal prosecution." Kate sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "And Jacob, his charges will be dropped. Lieutenant Morrison's name will be cleared completely. In fact, there's talk of offering him a position with federal law enforcement given his performance in this investigation." For the first time in months, Kate allowed herself to think about the future instead of just survival. A future that included Jacob Molly and the possibility of the peaceful life they'd all been denied. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go back to Fort Carson and marry that lieutenant of yours," Hartley said with a genuine smile. "You've earned your happy ending, Mrs. Reynolds." As Kate prepared to leave Denver for what she hoped was the last time she took one final look at the city that had cost her so much, her father was gone and nothing would bring him back. But his killers would face justice, and the corruption he'd died fighting was finally exposed. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was enough. It was time to go home. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning at Fort Carson, with the entire garrison serving as witnesses and the Rocky Mountains providing a backdrop that made even the chaplain's dry service seem romantic. Kate wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had somehow managed to have delivered from Deadwater, while Jacob stood beside her in his dress uniform, recently returned to him along with his restored rank and reputation. Molly served as both flower girl and ring bearer, a dual role she approached with the utmost seriousness. When the chaplain asked if anyone objected to the union, she spoke up with perfect timing. "I object to taking so long to get married," she announced solemnly. "I've been ready to be a family for months." The laughter that rippled through the assembled soldiers and townspeople was warm and genuine, the sound of a community celebrating new beginnings. Colonel Mitchell served as Jacob's best man, while Mrs. Patterson stood as Kate's matron of honor, having made the journey from Deadwater specifically for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with vows that acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. "Catherine Reynolds," Jacob said when the chaplain prompted him, "I promise to stand between you and danger, to build a home worthy of your trust, and to love your daughter as if she were my own blood." "Jacob Morrison," Kate replied, "I promise to stand beside you in whatever trials come, to trust in your courage and honor, and to build a life that honors the sacrifices we both made to reach this moment." When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob's kiss was gentle but thorough, sealing promises that had been tested by violence and proven by shared courage. "Are we really a family now?" Molly asked as they walked to the reception in the officers' mess. "We've been a family since that first night in Deadwater," Jacob replied, swinging her up onto his shoulders. "We just made it official." The reception was a modest affair, but filled with genuine warmth. Deputy Garrett had made the journey from Deadwater with a dozen other townspeople, all eager to celebrate the couple who'd saved their community from destruction. Assistant Attorney General Hartley sent his regrets along with a wedding gift, a deed to a ranch outside Denver that had been confiscated from one of Crawford's associates. 200 acres of prime grazing land, Kate read from the accompanying letter. A wedding gift from a grateful federal government. Jacob studied the deed with wonder. "We have a home, a real home." "With horses?" Molly asked hopefully. "With as many horses as you can handle, little one," Jacob promised. As the sun set over the mountains and the reception wound down, Kate found herself on the fort's parade ground, with her new family watching stars appear in a clear sky that seemed to promise infinite possibilities. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, his arm around her waist. "My father," Kate admitted. "How much he would have loved today, how proud he would have been to see justice finally served." "He's watching," Molly said with 8-year-old certainty. "Grandpapa's watching from heaven, and he's happy because we're safe now." Kate felt tears threaten, but held them back. Tonight was for celebration, not sorrow. "Yes, sweetheart, he's happy because we're together. And because you caught all the bad men," Molly added pragmatically. Jacob laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "That's right, Miss Molly. All the bad men are caught, and all the good people are safe. Forever." Kate and Jacob exchanged a look over their daughter's head. They both knew there were no guarantees in life, no promises that couldn't be broken by circumstance or tragedy. But they also knew that some things were worth believing in, worth fighting for, worth the risk of hope. "Forever," Jacob said firmly. "This family doesn't break no matter what." "Good," Molly said with satisfaction, "because I like being safe with you and Mama." As they stood together under a canopy of stars, Kate realized that her father's legacy lived on, not in the evidence that had brought down his killers, but in the family that had found each other while seeking justice. Judge Morrison Reynolds had taught his daughter that some things were worth fighting for even unto death. She had learned that some things were also worth living for, like love that grew from shared courage, like justice that demanded personal sacrifice, like the family that chose each other when blood wasn't enough. The fake marshal's real secret hadn't been his identity or his past. It had been his capacity for redemption, his ability to choose love over fear, protection over safety, hope over despair. And in choosing those things, Jacob Morrison had saved more than just Kate and Molly's lives. He had saved his own soul. 6 months later, Kate stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Jacob teach Molly how to properly saddle a horse. The child's laughter carried across the yard as the patient mare stood still for her fumbling attempts with the cinch strap. "She's going to be a natural," called Deputy Garrett, now Sheriff Garrett, from where he sat on the porch steps. He'd ridden over from Deadwater with news that the town was thriving now that the territorial corruption had been exposed and honest officials were in place. "She gets her fearlessness from her mother," Jacob replied, steadying the saddle as Molly worked. Kate smiled at the exchange. Over the months since their wedding, she'd watched Jacob grow into the role of father with the same natural competence he'd shown as sheriff and soldier. Molly adored him completely, and the feeling was clearly mutual. "Any word from Denver?" Kate asked Sheriff Garrett. "Crawford's trial is set for next month. Hartley says they've got enough evidence to hang him twice over." Garrett's satisfaction was evident. "The other conspirators are already pleading guilty, hoping for lighter sentences." Kate nodded. She'd given her testimony to federal prosecutors the previous month, reliving that terrible night in Denver one final time for the sake of justice. It had been difficult but necessary, and she was glad it was over. "What about the stolen land claims?" Jacob asked, helping Molly mount the mare. "All being reversed. Legitimate homesteaders are getting their property back, and the territorial government is paying compensation for damages." Garrett smiled grimly. "Turns out honest governance is cheaper than corruption in the long run." Molly rode the mare around the yard with Jacob walking beside her, her face bright with concentration and joy. Watching them together, Kate felt the deep contentment of someone who'd found their place in the world. "Kate," Garrett said quietly, "there's something else. The federal government wants to offer Jacob a permanent position as a territorial marshal. Good pay, respected work, and a chance to help clean up the rest of the corruption in Colorado." Kate considered this news. They were happy on their ranch building the quiet life away from the dangers and complications of law enforcement. But she also knew that Jacob needed work that mattered, challenges that engaged his sense of justice and duty. "What does Jacob think?" she asked. "Haven't told him yet. Wanted to talk to you first." Garrett's expression was serious. It would mean traveling, sometimes dealing with dangerous men, putting himself at risk to protect people who can't protect themselves. Kate watched her husband guide their daughter through a simple riding lesson. His patience infinite, his protective instincts constantly alert. This was a man who needed to serve something larger than himself. "Tell him," she decided, "and tell him he has my full support whatever he decides." That evening, after Molly had gone to bed, full of excitement about her riding lesson, Kate and Jacob sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Bill Garrett brought interesting news today," Kate said, settling into the swing Jacob had built for her. "About Crawford's trial. About you. The federal government wants to offer you a position as a territorial marshal." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "What do you think?" "I think you're a man who needs to serve something bigger than himself. I think the territory needs honest lawmen who understand what justice really means." Kate took his hand. "And I think we're strong enough as a family to handle whatever challenges come with that kind of work. It would mean danger, travel, time away from you and Molly. It would also mean helping people who can't help themselves, stopping men like Crawford and Blackwood before they can destroy more innocent lives." Kate smiled. "It's what my father would have done if he'd had the chance." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I fell in love with a man who faced down 4 federal agents to protect strangers. I'm sure that man needs work that matters." Kate leaned against his shoulder. "And I'm sure that we can build a life together that honors both duty and love." "What about Molly?" "Molly needs to see that adults keep their promises, fight for what's right, and protect people who need protecting. She needs to grow up believing that good people stand up to bad people even when it's dangerous." Jacob was quiet for another moment, then he chuckled softly. "What?" Kate asked. "I was just thinking about that first day in Deadwater. You stepped off that stagecoach looking for a mail-order bride's life of quiet respectability. And instead I found a wanted fugitive who turned out to be the most honorable man I'd ever met." Kate's smile was soft with memory. "Not quite what I ordered, but definitely what I needed. And now you're suggesting I become a territorial marshal. So much for that quiet life. Jacob Morrison, quiet was never really an option for us. We're the kind of people who find trouble, or trouble finds us." Kate turned in his arms to face him directly. "The question is whether we meet it together or separately." "Together," Jacob said without hesitation. "Always together. Then accept the marshal's badge and let's see how much good we can do in this territory." Jacob kissed her gently, sealing another promise between them. "Yes, ma'am." From inside the house came Molly's voice calling out in her sleep. Not in fear this time, but in the contented murmur of a child who felt completely safe. The sound made both adults smile. They'd built something worth protecting here, a family forged by shared courage, a love tested by fire, and a future bright with possibility. Whatever challenges came next, they would meet them as they'd met everything else, together with honor and with the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for. The fake marshal had become a real lawman. The fugitive judge's daughter had become a marshal's wife. The traumatized child had become a beloved daughter. And in the Colorado Territory of 1885, where justice was often hard to find and harder to keep, three people who'd started as strangers had become the kind of family that could change the world, one honest choice at a time. Their story would be told in Deadwater for generations, how a woman seeking safety found love, how a man running from his past discovered his purpose, and how a little girl's courage helped save them all. But that night, sitting on their porch under a canopy of stars, they weren't thinking about legacy or legend. They were simply thinking about tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that, stretching ahead like an invitation to adventure. Together, always together. Thank you for joining Kate, Jacob, and Molly on their journey from deception to truth, from danger to safety, and from loneliness to love. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful families are forged in the crucible of shared courage, and that real love is found not in perfect circumstances, but in the choice to stand together against impossible odds. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and redemption set against the backdrop of the Colorado Territory, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more heartwarming stories of frontier families who prove that love really can conquer all. What other adventures would you like to see our Western families face? Let us know in the comments below, and until next time, remember that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about being beyond redemption. Because the truth is, it's never too late to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and justice over convenience. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.